This is the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast. I'm Lisa Salisbury, and this is episode 81, Bounce Back Culture in Postpartum with Arielle Martone. If you've had a baby, you've heard the term bounce back. How quickly you bounce back into your body or your life is often celebrated. But does this hinder our recovery? And more importantly, for my clients and for you listeners, are you still carrying some of those thoughts about trying to get your body back into your weight loss today? Listen as Dr. Arielle Martone and I discuss what true recovery looks like in postpartum and how we can avoid this talk of bouncing back. And keep listening, even if you are multiple years postpartum like I am, it is never too late. Spoiler alert, we are going to talk about peeing with sneezing. Welcome to Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, the podcast for women who want to lose weight but are tired of counting and calculating all the food. I'm your host, Lisa Salisbury. I'm a certified health and weight loss coach and life coach, and most importantly, a recovered chronic dieter. I'll teach you to figure out why you are eating when you aren't hungry instead of worrying so much about what you are eating. Welcome back to the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast. I am excited to have Arielle Martone. She is a physical therapist and a postpartum wellness coach here on the podcast today. Welcome, Arielle.
Hi, thank you.
So we are going to be talking all about her expertise in postpartum wellness. So I'm going to let her get started with introducing herself, a little bit about what she does, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
Yes, sure. So thank you for having me, Lisa. I am a doctor of physical therapy, a yoga teacher, pre and postnatal coach, and I've shifted fully into postpartum wellness coaching after having my two kids. I had to do IVF for both of them. And so it was a long process to get there. And through that process and really through my own postpartum phase and postpartum journey, being a physical therapist and having some training in women's health and pelvic health prior to my own motherhood journey, and having strong interest there, I sort of knew what to expect, at least from the physical recovery aspect. I knew that I needed to physically recover, which I feel like is something that is not really well known after having a baby. We kind of just brush through it and gloss over it. And we think that, oh, it's just this natural process that happens. And so we just kind of go back to how we were without having to do anything. But, our body was adjusting and growing and shifting for the entire, 9, closer to 10 months of carrying the baby. Then the actual delivery process, however that occurs, and then afterwards. So it does need to heal. And then we do need to go through an active recovery to really move forward with how our body is moving and functioning properly. So I had some background in that. I had some awareness, but I wasn't really prepared for one, the difficulty of it, and two, I was kind of expecting a little bit more guidance on it. I was a physical therapist, been practicing for close to 15 years now, and I've worked in almost every setting. I've worked in a hospital, and after any type of surgery, you are met with a physical therapist for pretty much any surgery. With my son, I had a C-section, major abdominal surgery. Not a single therapist came into the room. Again, fortunately, because I knew how to move around after a surgery, I was able to, get myself out of bed, rolling to my side and all of that. But I was kind of surprised that there really was no guidance on what we should be doing. We were giving kind of a brief list of what not to do for that 6-week time frame. And then basically you're like good to go.
I feel like the only thing I was given is don't have sex for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That was the only instruction. Take it easy, don't have sex, then you're good to go.
Yeah, with my daughter, because I was able to have a VBAC, vaginal birth after, that was basically the instruction: no sex for 6 weeks and no exercising for 6 weeks. But but what does that even mean? Right? So we
Yeah.
should have a little bit of guidance on that. But after the C-section, there was a little bit longer of a list. Basically, it was not too much
Lifting.
twisting and lifting, nothing heavier than the baby, but the baby in the car seat carrier, pretty much, which is actually
Right.
quite heavy.
Pretty
And,
heavy and awkward because it's to
yeah,
the side. It's like a weird motion.
I know. And I know there's a way that you're supposed to carry it where your arm is kind of straight and your hand is hooked on the side. I've tried so many times and I don't know if it's just my proportions. I'm a little shorter. I could not get it.
Yeah, I never could get that either.
It was always awkward and heavy to carry. But those are basically, the instructions that I was given. I was given an abdominal binder, but how long should I be wearing it? How tight should I be wearing it? There really wasn't any education around that, or really like what to look for signs of infection with the incision or how to take care of the incision. There's a lot of information that could be given and should be given out to mothers after a C-section specifically, but really, after a vaginal birth as well, on like what to do, what to expect for, going to the bathroom for the first few times and how to make that easier. And, just simple things that we really take for granted that when you come home with your baby, you're like, okay, and now what? And now what do I do?
Okay, so that is amazing. I think we all can tell stories about our postpartum, and pretty much no one has a story of like, oh, yes, and they offer me physical therapy and it was so easy to recover. So nobody has that. But specifically, why are we talking about this today on my podcast, being that primarily I focus on weight loss and health and stuff. And one of the things Arielle and I wanted to discuss is the bounce back culture. The bounce back culture, which has a lot to do, not just with your physical shape and strength and those kinds of things, but also with your actual scale weight. A lot of my listeners know I have 4 kids. And so I basically was pregnant or nursing for like 9 years. So of my 20s, like for most of my 20s, right? And I had these like breaks in between. I'd have like a year in between. I'd have 9 months in between. And my major thought was like, I've got to get my body back. Like, where did it go? Did I lose it? Like what? And I felt a lot of pressure. There was a lot of stories back then, specifically from my mother. Love her, never want to throw her under the bus, but oh, well, so-and-so, she wore her pre-pregnancy jeans right out of the hospital. I know who she's talking about. She's told me the story a lot of times. And, she mentioned how long it took her to get back into her jeans, all of those kinds of stories. And so it was a lot of pressure. And then with my last, and I knew she was going to be my last, my youngest, I got pregnant and I was like, okay, this is the last time I can be fat. And this painful thought is etched in my brain, even though I know pregnancy is not the same as being overweight, even though I know that what I should have done is really take care of my body. But what my brain said is, this is the last time you have permission to eat all the cupcakes and not worry that it's going to put on pounds. And so I had a lot of, this was well before I found coaching, well before I was much healthier in my thoughts about my body and my weight and what I eat. And so not only was I overeating during pregnancy because I thought I had the permission to, but I also thought I had the permission to not exercise and not do any kind of training to really prepare my body. And I know you are primarily in postpartum, but there's got to be some issues there as well with like going into this, major physical feat, which is birth, with, zero strength basically in my abdominal region. So Arielle sent me a message and was like, I think I'd be great on your podcast. And I'm like, yes, because we have all this like pent up stuff about this bounce back stuff and all of these things that we did not get when we were pregnant and in that postpartum. So first of all, I just want to establish the baseline of, is formal recovery needed in postpartum? Is it true that we're just like, oh, it's natural. So everybody recovers normally. We don't really need anything formal. That's what everybody believes. But what do you believe?
Right. No, I believe that everybody needs formal recovery, at least to some extent, after having a baby. Yes, it is a natural process and there are natural changes that occur, but they do not always just bounce back together. Um, we can look at a sprained ankle. You're running and you twist your ankle. Sure, that happens naturally as well, right? And there's a natural process of inflammation and all of that that kind of helps to mend it a little bit. And you could, depending on the degree of the sprain and all that, you could potentially not do anything about it. I know a lot of people that don't do anything about it, right? They are told to just walk it off and they let it go, whatever. And the ankle heals, but it doesn't heal the way that it did or the way that it was before, right? There's going to be limitations and restrictions in that foot and ankle if you don't rehab it properly afterwards. And it's the same with our pelvis and our body after childbirth. So, do things go back together? Yes, not always. Sometimes the pelvis itself doesn't go back into that pre-pregnancy positioning without assistance after having a baby. And it could be because of, just the ligament laxity and the positioning that it needs to be in to hold the baby. And then as the baby's delivering, our pelvis kind of shifts again and the lower portion of the pelvis kind of wings outward to make room for the baby to pass through. That can sometimes kind of get stuck there. Usually it goes back together, but it doesn't for everyone. And the same with the sacrum, the flat bone in the back of the pelvis, like where your tailbone is. That tends to kind of go into flexion. So it tips forward so that that tailbone piece is kind of pointing out towards your backside, again, to make room for the baby's head and body to go through. And usually, again, it kind of goes back into place, but it doesn't always go back into place. And it can kind of get stuck in that forward position, which can lead to a lot of pain and discomfort when you're sitting. It can lead to issues with bowel and bladder, whether it be constipation because you're not able to kind of fully empty or allow your bowel movement to pass. So I would say that yes, everybody needs some type of recovery after having a baby. Definitely if there was a cesarean birth that had to occur, because again, that is a major abdominal surgery that happens. So it absolutely needs to be recovered and be really treated and kind of honored as such. We kind of just brush it off as like, oh, well, we just had a baby. It's just another way of doing it. It's almost so routine now that it is. I mean, it is the most common surgical procedure in our hospitals today. So it is very routine, but because of that, it doesn't really get the attention that it really deserves for the care afterwards.
On some of those things, I'm hearing some of myself in those issues you're describing. And I'm 15 years postpartum, almost 16.
Mm-hmm.
She's about to turn 16, my youngest is. Is it ever too late?
No. So it's always better to happen sooner rather than later because the recovery process will be quicker the closer to the event. But it is never too late. You can go back, especially if you're having any type of issues, which a lot of times women do. It's so common to have urinary incontinence if you're laughing or sneezing to just pee a little bit. And again, it's one of those things it's so common that it's normalized. And because it's
Totally.
normalized, people don't do anything about it. They just kind of laugh it off and be like, oh, mom life.
Well, we laugh it off with our legs crossed.
Exactly. But yeah, because it's normalized. And a lot of, it is so common, I believe, because we are neglecting that postpartum care that our bodies really deserve afterwards, or to the point of bounce back culture, we're trying to get back or, into either the activity that we were doing prior to that we really enjoyed for our own sanity or to get our body back and rushing into exercises that we're not really prepared for. And that can cause issues down the road. But no, it's definitely not too late.
Yeah, I have a few spots in my body that I just know Like, and I'm like, well, that's from childbirth. Like I was doing
Mhm.
these plate adduction things where basically, you're bringing a plate in on the plate's on the floor and you're pulling it in with your foot. And so it's an
Okay.
adduction movement. And every time I do that or any of those things, I feel it in the pubic symphysis, which is the little pad in the middle of well, you can explain it better, but it's in the front of the pelvis and it really gets soft so that it spreads
Mhm.
apart there. And I feel like somehow that piece never really healed right because I can feel it. And it's like I can't do a heavy enough weight to feel it in my adductors in my thighs because it kind of hurts that little spot. And then I have this other I've been told it's called the round ligament and it hurts every time I do a certain cough movement or if I
Mhm.
cough and I'm like I remember because I first noticed it after childbirth and I asked my doctor and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's from pregnancy." And I'm like, "Okay, but
Right.
it's
It's
been
just
16
normalized.
years."
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah, just like that. You just have to deal with it. Yes. But yeah, so with your pubic symphysis specifically, there's a chance that it is still wider, that it never like closed up like it should, or if it shifted at all. So sometimes what happens is, one half of the pelvis, depending on the positions that you gave birth, you can have one side of your pelvis kind of shift up higher than the other. So there might be some more separation that way too.
Yeah. So don't ignore this stuff. I know I've been talking a lot on the podcast about not ignoring our perimenopause symptoms. And now I'm like back to childbirth. I'm all over the place. But I mean, as women, this is how it is. There's issues from childbirth, and then you just really get right into your hormonal issues.
I was going to say it's all related. And if we're used to just kind of brushing those things under the rug and being like, oh, well, those first few weeks or months or year or so after having a baby, my hormones are going to be all over the place. And we just kind of, we normalize that. We normalize these like big mood swings because we think that, again, that it's just normal and it's going to happen. But it doesn't need to happen, to the extent that we're feeling it.
Yeah. So why do you think that new moms have this feeling like they have to, like they must get their bodies back postpartum? And is is that an issue to be thinking that?
So I think it's kind of twofold. One, I think we have a lot of society pressure on us. That's very kind of over and covert at the same time. Like there's certain messaging out there that is just very obvious.
Mhm.
Tons of marketing towards getting your body back after baby, lots of, dieting to do, even a lot of I see talk of healing your diastasis, the separation of your abdominal muscles, and healing your pelvic floor after baby in relation to getting your body back.
Right, to
Um,
the shape of your body, not to the health of your body, but
right.
get this back so that you can get back into your jeans or look
Yeah.
slim
Get rid
type
of your
thing.
mom belly. And yep.
Yes.
So there's a lot of that we're getting. And there's also, you get 6 weeks. And if you're lucky, you get maybe 12 weeks of time off. And then you're expected to kind of just be back at work and, just kind of bounce back into your roles with your relationships change after having a baby. And there's really no time or space that we allow for that to kind of develop or for us to kind of look inwards to it and kind of see and allow shifts to happen. But we're expected that, our relationship with our partner is just exactly like it was before. But now there's this baby in there. Or if you have multiple kids, your relationships are constantly adjusting between, you and all of your children, making room for this new baby that's coming in. And we don't really allow for that. We don't talk about that. It's just kind of like, okay, you have this baby, you go home and everything is going to be great and wonderful and good luck. But I think, there's also, I feel like because the transition into motherhood is such this big, abrupt transition, hormonally, our roles are changing as well. And, physically we're having a lot of changes. Our brain changes after having a baby. And it all happens like very quickly. And the hormone shifts are, the greatest that we experience in the shortest amount of time
Mm.
as women. So puberty and menopause being the other really big shifts, but they're
Those
a
take
little bit
years.
more, they're more
Yeah.
gradual as opposed to like you have the baby and it's this abrupt change. Even, pregnancy, our hormones are shifting, but again, it's kind of gradually over that, 9 to 10 month period.
That makes sense. I've never thought about that. Like that. Yeah. All of our other hormone changes really occur over time, but
Yes.
yeah.
So we're like slowly adjusting to them. I mean, they're
Oh no,
very
it's still
impactful
hard.
as well, but
Yeah.
yes, it's still hard. It's still impactful. You need to make adjustments and kind of change. But I feel like, with motherhood, there's, the physical and the hormonal changes, but then our role changes as well and how we're identifying ourselves changes. And it's a lot at once. And I feel like it's harder to kind of pinpoint your role change and how you're identifying yourself. And it's easier to kind of put all of that onto something physical that you can see. And it's kind of our body that takes the brunt of it. Like, I'm not feeling like myself. I'm feeling a little bit lost. I'm feeling disconnected. Like, oh, it's because my body is squishy now, and I had the baby in there, but now it's all squishy and I just want it to be back to normal, in quotes. Because once that happens, then I'm going to feel good. Once that happens, then I'm going to feel confident. Once that happens, then I can do XYZ, or my relationship with my partner is going to be great again. And it's not really the case, because there's a lot of kind of inner work and digging that we need to do to really allow ourselves to develop into that role as mother, as well as still seeing ourselves as a whole person, which is really important because we can kind of narrow in on like, now I'm a mom and that's like everything, blinders on, but we really have to account for, for all of us, our whole being, when we're looking at that role adjusting.
I can see how too, like when you're describing that, thinking how, basically everything will be different when my body goes back to, again, we're putting a lot of things in air quotes
Normal,
here, meaning
yes.
normal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When my body goes back to how it was before or pre-pregnancy. And I think this so easily just trickles into 5-10 years down the road when you're feeling overweight and you're like, everything will be solved if I could just get this weight off. And I would if I could just get this weight off, I'll love my body again. And it's just not how it works. I see it time and time again that we think all of our problems are going to be solved. And I am just starting to wonder as you're talking if this is where it starts for us with this whole like need to get our bodies back postpartum.
Yeah, I think it's a big factor in it for sure.
Yeah. So how do you think bounce back culture hinders recovery?
So in so many ways, I think it doesn't allow for recovery to start with.
Right, because bounce back isn't healing. Bounce back is just go back to how you were, as if nothing has happened. That's not recovery.
Exactly. As this big life altering, physically, emotionally, role structure change, we just kind of brush it under the rug, and it's something you wanted, so you're going to be just thrilled with it, right? So just deal with it and get back to everything you were doing.
You signed up for this. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah, so it doesn't allow for recovery to happen. It doesn't allow for us to let our body kind of heal first and then rebuild. We kind of go from that like 6-week mark where we're not supposed to do anything, and people tend to not do anything. And I mean, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it where people do absolutely nothing for those 6 weeks, which isn't really helpful either, because we do need to be active to allow some recovery. We have to really balance that with rest. Like walking from day one is one of the best things you can do for yourself postpartum. Of course, you want to kind of gradually build up to what you're tolerating, but you don't want to be super sedentary, and you want to change positions often because that really helps with recovery as well, and helps from things like getting tight, especially in postpartum, where so much of those early days are really kind of in that rounded forward, curled in position. You're curled in around your baby constantly with, feeding, rocking them to sleep, all of that. So you do want to allow for, your chest area to stretch out a little bit, to bring some motion back to your pelvis. But with bounce back, so people are, sedentary for those 6 weeks, or they're pushing and doing too much because they really feel that kind of anxiety of not getting their body back. And so they try to start things too soon without talking to their doctor about it, without really discussing it. But even if they're waiting until that 6 week mark, and then, you're given the green light, so you just jump into everything, quite literally, your body is not prepared for that. You've done no real healing, no recovery, no rebuilding. And so that really puts you at risk for some of the issues we were talking about before, of like having leaks in your bladder or having symptoms of prolapse where you're feeling kind of that heaviness in your pelvis. If your uterus can kind of lower down, or symptoms of bowel issues where you're either constipated or, having a lot of difficulty wiping clean. A lot of those issues, pelvic pain, pain with intercourse, can be avoided if we allow for our bodies to heal and then rebuild first, rather than just jumping right into activity that our body is really not prepared for and not ready for. Our ligaments are still lax for a period of time after having a baby. And if you're breastfeeding, there's some laxity there throughout the whole breastfeeding process as well. So it's just needing to be really mindful of those things as you're kind of progressing forward in what you're doing.
Perfect. That's really helpful. And I know most of my listeners are past this postpartum era, but I think it's really important to think about how we did heal and what things we might still be carrying from this time, and what kind of things that we might have sort of gotten stuck in that bounce back type thing and getting our bodies back. You have your body's beautiful. It can do amazing things. And I always say we can't hate ourselves then. Gotta love what it's doing now. As one extra little bonus question for those of us that
Mhm.
are well past our postpartum years, I'm curious if there's anything that we can do for that urinary incontinence that you mentioned, laughing, coughing, sneezing, and inability to get on my kid's trampoline.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
because I think a lot of us are like, well, it's just like, welcome to having 4 babies, you know, like at this stage, if you're 10 or 15 or, maybe beyond your postpartum, is there anything we can do for that?
Yes. So it's a lot of it is the same kind of protocol, the same stuff that you would do if it was happening early on. A lot of it is focusing on your breath first. So as you were saying before, of kind of like holding on to some of the stuff that happened during your postpartum, we hold a lot of tension in our pelvic floor. We often think, we hold a lot in our shoulders and our necks, but to the same extent, we're holding a lot of that in our pelvic floor. And you can just check in on yourself and notice, when you're standing, if you're doing the dishes or something, pause for a minute and just bring your attention to your glutes, because that is an area where people tend to really clench in if you're standing for a while, and that all of that clenching, so kind of tucking that tailbone under, squeezing your butt cheeks together, is kind of building up tension. So kind of bringing awareness to that, to how you're standing, how you're doing different activities, and just kind of notice it first of all. And then again, position changes and changing positions often is really helpful to kind of prevent things from getting tighter. So if you're standing for a while, using a step stool to put one foot up for a few minutes and then switching and doing the other one, or just going from sitting to standing often throughout the day, making sure that you're not stuck at your desk for too long without taking standing breaks or walking breaks, and starting to focus on your breath. And, we talk about for, relaxation and things like that, kind of doing these deep belly breaths where you're really using your diaphragm. But instead of just thinking about breathing and having your belly kind of expand on the inhale, you want to think about breathing all the way down to your pelvic floor, as well as kind of out to the back sides of your ribs. So you really want to do a full kind of like 360 breath. So it's not just your belly that's going forward and back, but it's, your ribs are going out to the side, and you're thinking of your pelvic floor lowering down as your diaphragm lowers down on that inhale. And then on that passive exhale, everything kind of coming in together. can be really helpful. If you're having a lot of symptoms, again, because the further out you are, the longer that it may take to fix some of those issues, is getting in to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. Whether it's, there are some that do in homework, and there are others that are in outpatient settings. So kind of, doing some Google searches, finding someone there. You can ask your OB. They should have at least a couple of people in the area that you're in that can provide you with some good quality care.
I think it's so important just to know that pelvic floor physical therapist is a thing. Like,
Yeah.
again, with women's health, it's like, well, we just deal with it. Like, no, tell your OB, tell your gynecologist, like, hey, this is still an issue for me. It's been 15 years and I still pee when I cough. Like, it's very annoying. Like, tell them
Yes.
it's not normal. I constantly say this, just because it's common does not make it normal.
Oh my God, I say it all the time. All the time.
It's not,
Yes.
you don't have to deal with these things. And so it's not too late for you if you're still having some of these issues from postpartum. And it's just, I think, really important whether you're just a few months out or several years out like me. So I think I'll still be healing when I get my first grandchild.
To that point, make sure you let them know too that, like you were saying, you might be past that postpartum period of life, but chances are someone who is going through it right now. So check in on them and ask them how they're doing when you're asking how the baby's doing. Really check in on the mother and let her know, to your point, Lisa, that what is common is not always normal, and there is a lot that you can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those of us in the older age range, really take this knowledge for your daughters and your daughter-in-laws and be a resource for them. Also, just be aware of your language. Like, don't ever ask them if they're bouncing back. Let's just stop using these words. Let's stop using this language of getting your body back and really shifting into recovery language. I think it's just so important for ourselves to kind of rewrite our past, but also as we move forward in our next generation, just, I'm always wanting to be a good influence and a force for good on my children and my future grandchildren. And I think this is one of the ways that we can really do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Why don't you tell people where they can find you online? I assume you can do some of these services for us remote.
Yes. Yeah. So I do in-person PT, local in my area, so north of Boston. But otherwise, I have online virtual services available. So you can find all of that information at my website, which is findyourwaymama.com. And you can also find out some more information and helpful tips on my Instagram, which is at Arielle Martone.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll put those links in the show notes so people can find you easily.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for listening today to the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast.